Good morning, fourth graders. Today I am going to briefly model for you how I would find the main idea in a chapter, if that was my task, using a box and bullets graphic organizer. That's your task for this week, is to determine the main idea and 3 supporting details in chapter 2 in the book Living in Space. So I'm going to show you how I would do it for chapter 1. Now, whenever you are tasked with finding the main idea, always go back and reread. Sometimes a teacher or a test might say, oh, what's the main idea of a certain chapter, or even sometimes a certain paragraph. Like if they say paragraph 3, what you want to make sure you do is go back and reread paragraph 3 in order to do that. So the same applies for this. If I'm asking you to tell the main idea of chapter 2, you need to go back and reread chapter 2. So I'm going to show you how I would do it for chapter 1. So you're prepared to do it. So I would always go back and reread. Usually I'm going to look if there's a chapter title. That's a huge clue for me. So the chapter title here is the International Space Station. That's a huge clue that's going to be probably some words I need in my main idea sentence, because that's what this chapter is mostly going to be about. So I'm going to reread the chapter briefly. The International Space Station is a place where people can live in space for months at a time. It was built in 1998 by people from 15 countries. People who live and work on the International Space Station are called astronauts. Astronauts learn what it's like to live in space and how living in space affects things. Now, the first time I read the space facts, but I know the main idea is not going to be in a text box, so I'm just going to move on. Getting there. Astronauts go to the International Space Station on a space shuttle. Everything astronauts need while they live in space is brought by shuttle to the space station. That includes food, water, clothing, and science equipment. When the shuttle goes back to Earth, it takes away all the garbage from the space station. So look at the photographs. And I'm already on chapter 2. So if I'm tasked with determining the main idea of chapter 1, I am going to be thinking, what I have a couple of things. What did I learn? I could start by recording some details, or I could start if I knew the main idea. So what I'm going to do is think about some details I learned. And I'm thinking, okay, getting there was a heading, so I might want to have a detail about a heading. So getting there. One of my details is astronauts get to the International Space Station. And there's a big picture so that must be important. They get to the International Space Station by space shuttle. I feel like that was a pretty important detail in the book. After all, it did have a heading, getting there, so I included that for a detail that I learned. Something else I learned. Well, I learned that astronauts bring every everything they need. Doesn't sound like there's any supplies up there. The text did tell me that they need to bring everything they need, and they take their garbage home. That was kind of a fun fact. So astronauts bring everything they need. Oh, and I might want to put where do they bring everything they need? To the International Space Station. And they take their garbage home. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my book and say, okay, what else did, oh yeah, this was a big point, that astronauts learn what it's like to live in space at the International Space Station. Astronauts learn what it's like to live in space at the International Space Station. So now I wrote 3 details in the book, and I'm noticing that they all have the word astronauts in them. And I'm also noticing that each detail has to do with the International Space Station. So when I'm rereading these and I'm thinking, okay, so what's the author trying to tell me in this whole chapter? What's the big idea? It's probably going to have those 2 words in it. So I'm thinking the main idea is the International Space Station is a place for astronauts to live in space. Almost every single one of my supporting, actually every single one of my supporting details has to do with the fact that astronauts are living in space at the International Space Station, and all my details support that. So you can either work from the main idea, if you know the main idea right away, and then come up with some details, or sometimes it's easier to do what I just did and think about your details and then connect them back to the main idea. Okay, good luck doing this with chapter 2.